Welcome back to the Run Radio podcast. My name's Trina, and in the writer's room, we have a return guest, Sam Foster. Welcome.
Good morning to you, Trina, and thank you for having me back.
I love it when guests come back because it's fun to follow up, see what you've been doing, how your writing's been going. So tell me what's been going on.
Okay, I will. You and I originally talked about a historic fiction book about the Northwest Territories. It's part of a trilogy that runs the Northwest Territory, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, from 1769 to 1999. And I have just finished up the 20th century book that ends in 1999. May I show you the cover, Trina?
Please do.
Oh, can you see that clearly?
Yes.
And the reason I asked you to look at the cover, note, if you will, that Justice, who is always blindfolded, has taken her blindfold off on that cover. And she is staring straight at the scale, looking at one scale has a man, one scale has a woman, and she's growling at them. Ooh. Justice is not blind. And the artist who did that for me had it perfectly, because that is kind of the theme of this last book. This last book is a moral question, and it is the divide between the frontier and the 20th century. The American frontier, as we all know, was a wide open place. There was law, but it didn't always apply. Power tended to those who could take it. And creativity was abundant. People did what they wanted. Some of them got rich, some of them got away with it, some of them didn't. In the 20th century, we are very orderly. You know, we have rules for everything. There is not, I'm amused, but you will no longer find a swing set on a playground in America, either a school, a church, anywhere else, because we might get hurt. And so the nation has changed dramatically in the course of the 20th century. And that's what the book's about. The book is about that change. And it is a question about whether that change has been better for us or whether that change has been worse for us. As a society, are we better off to be closely constrained and have rules for everything? Or as a society, were we better off when we didn't have all those rules, but people cheated and lied? That's the question of the whole book, Trina. Wow. So the cover artist got it perfectly by me.
Really just good. Perfect. Yeah. What got you so interested in this topic? Because a lot of people, it's we're speaking for myself, I'm lucky to get my normal history down that, you know, we learn in school and keep that retention. But this is a lot of stuff. And then to add the creative element in, how do you get all that to happen?
It was an easy blend for me, Trina.
Wow.
Number one, my degree is in history. I've been fascinated with history my whole life, and I've never done anything with it. I mean, I'm like most kids who graduate from college. You got a degree, you go to work. It didn't matter what your degree was. Most of the people who listen to it will know that. But my ancestral home is indeed this town. My ancestral home is Beardstown, Illinois. And Beardstown, Illinois was a river port. And we all know, well, I shouldn't say we all know. People on the East Coast and the West Coast might not. But people from the Midwest know river ports. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Chicago. They're all river ports. And they are all places which in the 19th century were very much the frontier. They were very much open. They created immense amounts of wealth. They may not have been perfect societies, but they elevated almost everybody's life with money. They brought us into the 20th century. And I grew up with stories about this little town. And the stories about this little town, if for people who have followed my trilogy, it was the Wild West. Wyatt Earp had his first gunfight in Beardstown, Illinois. I mean, there's so many things like that. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas spoke in Beardstown, Illinois on the question of slavery. Cass County, Illinois, Beardstown's in, never did vote for Abraham Lincoln. They were so democratic, they voted with the Southerners. They were free and open. A lot of people there joined the Union Army, but a lot of them could have cared less. And so it was this town that was really caught in the middle, and I grew up with those stories. In the 1920s during the Prohibitionary, I'm sorry, in the 30s during the Prohibitionary, Frank Nitti, who was Al Capone's #1 killer, used to come down and hunt ducks there. I mean, it was a kind of a famous riverport place. And it has, in the 20th century, shriveled from 15,000 people to 6,000 people and gone damn near broke. Vacant lots with double wide trailers on them. So I'm a historian by education, and I'm a river rat by ancestry. So is that an easy blend? I mean, it was easy for me to come up with that.
Did you ever think that you might teach with a history degree, or did you just go with it because you liked it? I get curious what drives people to their majors and their study.
No, I never thought I'd teach.
Really?
But I did think I would like to write.
Ah.
And I write historic fiction, and that's mostly what I read. And Trina, the truth is, the only reason that I didn't write was, and I don't know about you, I know you're a creative person, you have created your life, but I wasn't willing to starve for art. I wasn't willing to live in a cold one-room apartment to write books.
Right.
So while I always scribbled, it was not until I had made money that I started to write.
I think a lot of people do that. In fact, that's how I started out. My course of study was determined by where I could get a job. Like so many people, you don't always follow your heart completely as to what that is. So, but I'm happy that you kind of did some foreshadowing and were able to do some studying and know that you might do something with that in your writing later.
So my Trina, this is personal, not about my art, but when I got out of the Marine Corps, I'm just old enough that every man who graduated from college the year I did had a choice for a graduation trip. You could go to Canada or you could go to Vietnam. So that was your graduation trip. And so I went into the Marine Corps, and this is the God's honest truth. I'm not making this up. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to an employment agency in Washington, D.C. I had been stationed in Northern Virginia, and I literally had my diploma from college in one hand and my honorable discharge from the Marine Corps in the other. And the question I asked was not, can you get me a job doing this or doing that or doing, the question I asked was, what's the most money you can get me?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
I mean, I made no career choice at all, except I didn't want to be poor anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people like me who are driven. I mean, I said I didn't want to be poor anymore. We weren't poor, but I slept on the couch until my older sister went away to school. We thought that was a normal middle-class kind of life. I mean, I didn't think I was impoverished, but I knew I wanted more. And so I just went to work to make more. That was all.
Yeah.
But I always knew I had this wide creative streak that as a young man, I was not willing to indulge.
Well, thankfully that you're able to do that now and you're sharing it with the world. Talk again a little bit about your publishing path. Has that changed any from the first book?
Let's see. Yes, it has changed from my first book.
Now, okay.
You and I have never discussed my first two novels.
Okay.
But I wrote my first novel 22 years ago, and it was while I was still working. Trina, I laugh. I'm so amused by this, but I will never be Raymond Chandler. I will never be famous like Raymond Chandler. But he and I have in common that we both wrote our first two books while we were executives with downtown Los Angeles firms.
Oh, okay.
And my first two books I wrote at lunch hour or after work at the LA library, scribbling longhand. And I'd go to the library and find a quiet little place and write. Those first two books I found a publishing house. I could not find an editor. Um, I had an editor who explained the world to me. He broke my heart, but he explained the world. He wrote me a letter back, and that he had read my manuscript was clear, and that he liked it was clear. And I was really hopeful reading his first few paragraphs. And then he said, but understand that agents are paid as a percentage of the advance you will get from a publishing house. And the advance you will get from a publishing house for this book, my 15% of it will not pay me to take 2 people to lunch to promote your book.
Oh, that's
Okay,
heartbreaking.
I didn't like it, but I learned the world. So I started going to very small independent publishing houses. And I found one named Daniel and Daniel, which is John and Susan Daniel. And I got a call one day at work from this guy. And I'm a salesman, so I'm nice to strangers on the phone. And I didn't know who he was. And finally, I realized this was the John Daniel that I'd sent a manuscript to. And he said to me, he said, look, he said, Daniel and Daniel is my wife and I. We make our living doing self-help books and cookbooks. But we're like everybody in the publishing business. What we like are stories. And we have a little imprint called Fithian Books that prints novels. And Fithian would like to publish your book. But I must tell you before we talk further that Fithian doesn't make Daniel and Daniel a dime, and it probably won't make you any money either. Are you still interested in talking to me? But John Daniel, of course I was. John Daniel picked me up when nobody else would.
Yeah.
And I love him dearly for that. He published my first 2 books. John died 2 years ago of Parkinson's, and Susan simply closed the shop down. And so I had to go back on the search again. And I'm wondering if I should say this, but I will. Candor is one of my vices. But I opened my own little publishing house. I own Agave Americana Books. And it was because I had worked all those years to make a little money. So not being able to find a publisher, it was my preference, rather than going to Amazon and self-publishing, to actually open a little publishing house and subcontract out everything I do. All I do is write, but Agave Americana is a unit that subcontracts out everything else to other people.
Why did you not want to go the KDP Amazon route?
It was instinct, but it's turned out for me that my instinct was correct.
Okay. I
have, and you will know this. Your readers won't, but you will, Trina. I have a 3-page single spaced sheet of every step between finished manuscript and a book that somebody can hold in their hand. And either somebody has to do every one of those steps, or you have to skip them and come out with a poor quality book. Those are a writer's choices. And I just saw KDP as a place where I wouldn't get professional help on cover art. I wouldn't get professional help on marketing. And it's not that I don't use KDP. I mean, my books are available on Amazon as well as bookstores. But it's just that I didn't want that to be my sole avenue. I wanted a more professional avenue than that.
Okay. I guess in the defense of I have talked to a lot of writers that have done it and they've done well. You are right, though. There's always a sacrifice, and a writer has to weigh their options as to which path is best for them. I'm happy, though, we've got more options to get stories told than ever before. I
couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
And the options are out there.
Yeah.
And the reason I went this route, I mean, one of the reasons was that I'd been a fairly successful businessman, so it wasn't as daunting to me as it might be to some other people. I understand that. But the reason I went this route is a guy that I don't know if you've ever interviewed or known, an author named Charlie Newton. And Charlie is a writer of shoot 'em up kind of stories, but they're contemporary. Drug dealers, treasure hunters, stuff like that. And Charlie has got 11 books, some of them which have done quite well. And Charlie is a friend of a friend, and the friend said, I want to introduce you to Charlie. He knows some things you need to know. And Charlie said to me, he said, Sam, he said, the first 8 books I produced, he said, I absolutely slaved to get them out, get them up, get them there. And he said, on my 8th book, I had finally made it. He said, I had the same agent. I had finally gotten a really good agent. And he was an agent who had done the last book he had agented was the Da Vinci Code. So he was a good agent, well known. And he said, and he had gotten me a deal with a major New York publishing house. I had reached the top of the mountain. And he said, and when I got there, I found out there was no there. The economics of publishing have changed so much that the major publishing houses no longer, let's see, his metaphor was this. He said that Motown nurtured Smokey Robinson for over 10 years as a songwriter before he learned to sing. He said, nobody can do that anymore, even the big publishing houses. They just push the little baby birds out of the nest, and they know most of them are going to crash on the rocks, and some of them are going to fly. And so he said, so you can do it if you want to. You can go through all that if you want to, but I'm telling you, it's not worth the effort. And I don't know if Charlie is right or if Charlie is wrong, because I've never had a major New York publishing house. I've just had a little independent.
Yeah.
But I took his wisdom and went his way.
Yeah.
And Charlie also, if I may, introduced me to somebody that I don't know that you've ever interviewed, but you would find fascinating. But there is a group in Seattle called Girl Friday Productions.
Okay.
And you know, Trina, these are all middle-aged women. No young woman is going to name her business Girl Friday. And they are all middle-aged women out of major publishing businesses, most of who have retired to Seattle.
Oh.
And they have got somebody in shop who knows every one of the steps on that 3-page document between manuscript and finished book.
Mm-hmm.
And they will simply contract, how much of this do you want? And their contracts are not complicated. They want to know how many words your manuscript is, and then they'll send you a contract. And the contract includes everything on those 3 pages. And you look at the number and you gulp really hard. And they say, no problem, which one of the services do you not want? And you start dismissing services that you think you can get by without to reduce the price of publishing it. But Girl Friday, I'm not saying that I use them for everything, but they can do everything a major publishing house can do. The author simply has to pay for it.
That's very valuable insight for a writer to know, because nobody's just going to usually divulge and tell you all that stuff. It takes the experience of other people to say, look, there are other ways to do it, but here's the pros and cons. So thanks for sharing that with people for sure.
And before I met Girl Friday, I had spent days on the internet looking up editors and creative editors and proofreaders, and there's zillions of them.
Yeah.
But you literally have no idea if the person you're talking to is a failed high school English teacher or really did just retire from Simon and Schuster and knows exactly what she's doing.
Oh, wow.
You don't know.
Yeah, you are right. What do you think is the most valuable thing? What's the one thing that a writer should invest in?
Money or time, which?
Money. What money should they spend if they're going to spend anything?
Editing.
That's what I've heard. Okay.
And again, you're going to know this, but many of your audience won't. There are 3 basic kinds of edit.
Okay.
A creative element, also called a developmental edit, which they go through and they say, you know, you haven't got enough conflict between your character's goal and obtaining the goal. You know, you haven't done a good job of describing this scene. You know, we don't know anything about your character before you throw him in the pit of peril. We don't know if we should love him or not. Those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then there are copy edits, which are people who must have the most boring lives in the world because they can read a 500-page book and say, do you know that on page 18, you said they were 2 years apart, and on page 312, you said they were 3 years apart? And you go, oh my God, no, I didn't know, right? And then the last one is a proofread. And of all of those, I think the important one is the developmental edit. I would not be nearly the writer I am if it were not for a guy named Dan Chrisman. I mean,
Yeah.
Dan Chrisman and I fight. He kills all my babies, but he makes my books better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and some of that comes to genre and type. With what you're writing, there are a lot of facts that you've got to keep track of. So I can completely respect that you need somebody that's paying attention, because not that you're not, but when you get so involved in the plot and the story and the writing, it's worth
Amen.
it for sure.
Amen.
For sure. Do you catch yourself? I had this question with another writer, so I want your take on it. Are you good at writing without stopping to edit, or are you guilty of doing the stop down and editing as you go?
The latter.
Good.
The latter.
Okay.
I simply, you know, Stephen Pressfield. Do you know him? Do you read any of his stuff?
Don't think
Gates of Fire won all sorts of awards. He is a writer of historic fiction, and he is my favorite author. If Pressfield writes it, I read it.
Oh, wow.
And but Stephen Pressfield and I share in common that we were both Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And Pressfield says he has got a little book called The War of Art, which is clearly a play on Sun Tzu's Art of War, right?
Uh-huh.
And I don't write books that writers write to tell you how to write. I've just always avoided them. But because it was Pressfield, I got it, I read it. And the most productive thing he said to me was that the thing who taught him most about writing was the United States Marine Corps, because they taught him to love misery. And so what Pressfield says is, don't worry about what you're saying. Say something. If it's 9:30 in the morning and it's time to write, go sit at the keyboard and write. And that's my model. And I throw a lot of stuff away, Trina.
Yeah,
I throw a lot of stuff away.
It's kind of funny. It's sort of along the lines of know the rules so you know when to break them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's always suggested. I've read so many times, don't worry about what you're writing, don't worry about editing, but there's something about that block. Well, if I don't fix that there, or there, then I can't get past it. So I just fix it.
Yeah.
So
and while we're on this subject, and again, I'm not talking to your audience so much as writers, so much as readers, but I have learned that when I edit, I have to read it out loud.
Yeah.
My eye plays tricks that my tongue does not.
Yes. As a narrator, I have learned that. I have read stuff that I'm like, did they read this out loud before they because it sounds like trying to convey what they want conveyed sometimes trips up the brain, and your brain will rearrange words too. So
it rearranges letters. I can read, and I meant to say it, and I say is instead, and I don't even see it because my brain says, no, that's what it meant, right?
Yes.
So I have to read out loud. Yeah, you and I agree with that.
Good. Yeah. And I think that's where it's valuable to invest in the people that can help you and know how to get your finished art the way you want it to present to the world.
Do I have a couple of minutes with you yet? I know we've only got a half an hour. I thought I saw you.
We've got a little more time. Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I want to say one thing about my book, if I may.
Yes, please.
On it about this. The book starts at the beginning of the 20th century when this little river port is very much a free-spirited kind of place. And in fact, there is a local madam who is very civically minded. She gives money to churches to build schools. She never gives it directly because she doesn't want to embarrass anybody. She gives it through her attorney so that he can make it anonymous. But everybody in town who is a leader in town knows that Vivian Divier is civically minded and gives money out. She also gives money to politicians, but gives money out for civic things. And the local state's attorney never harasses her shop. But if there is some little whorehouse on a dark alley that's causing fistfights and trouble, they get busted because that's illegal. That's the way the law is adjudicated in this town. And we have a young crusading attorney who comes back from World War II and runs for state's attorney and is going to clean up the town because during World War II, he's seen the rest of the world. He's seen how England operates. He's seen that other people, and he's embarrassed by the place he grew up in, and he cleans it up. And the town dies. It goes from 15,000 people and rich to 6,000 people, and not a building in town that doesn't have a broken window. And at the end of the book is the only time in any of the trilogy that people you will know come on. But when I say this word, you'll remember it. Beardstown was famous and it had one last hurrah, and it was in the 1990s. When I say the Beardstown ladies, you will instantly remember the town. They wrote a manual. They beat the market. Their investment club beat the securities market, and everybody interviewed them. Donahue, the Wall Street Journal, they were everywhere. And it turned out they made very little money on their investments because they were only investing $25 a month. But they made a life-changing sum of money when their book, The Beardstown Ladies' Investment Guide to Real Estate, became a national bestseller. And it was fraud.
Oh.
They had not beat the market at all. They had the old-time riverboat gamblers since. And if they made a few little technical errors when they wrote their book about how much they actually made, oh well. And so this old attorney, he is now very old and retired, who cleaned up the town, now has to ponder whether what those women did was more valuable to the town than what he did. Was cleaning up the town a good thing? Who did those women really hurt? Not one person asked for their money back. And they had open monthly meetings, and they became packed with people from all over the state who brought their copy of the book and wanted these crooks to sign it. And so the moral question becomes, what is the moral line we walk? Not just for us, that it's more, that I hope it's more important than that. It's not just the moral line for the people involved, it's what's best for society. When does being rule driven drive out all the creativity? And when does having no rules lead to chaos and corruption? Where is the line? That's what the book's about. And the reason the title is American Pied Piper, I think, let's see, where's the title? It's there at the bottom, American Pied Piper.
Yeah.
Because we're all familiar with the story of the Pied Piper who cleaned the rats out of the town of Hamlin and cleaned it up. Now, you're from Missouri, so you know that Cape Girardeau is a dying little river port. But all of those people from Natchez and Covington, Kentucky, and Cape Girardeau, and all those old 19th century ports are called river rats. And people are disdainful of them when they say it, but they say it proudly. And the reason people are disdainful is that those little river towns, all the businessmen had sharp elbows. They were not nice Christian farmers who went to church every Sunday morning and took their family. A completely different ethic. And in Pied Piper, they want their town cleaned up. And everybody knows this myth, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And they pay this guy 1,000 guilders to come pipe all the rats out of town, pipe them in the river and drown them. But then the town refuses to pay him. So that's not the end of the story. And when the town refuses to pay the Pied Piper, this is not Sam's version, this is the original myth. He comes back to the center of town, he plays a different tune on his pipe, and all of the children come to him. And he leads them into the river and drowned them. The moral of the story is that the cost of cleaning up their town also left it bereft of any creativity or youthful vibrance. And so that's why the book. Did the cost of cleaning up this town rob it of its creativity and vibrance? So it's a moral story. It's historic fiction, but it's a morality play.
And you've got more to come. And you're going to come back and talk about those as you finish them.
Let's see. Well, I will tell you, I finished the trilogy. This is the last trilogy. But I am writing a book, Trina, that I'm really worried about.
What?
I've fallen in love with 3 15th and 16th century Italian women who are 3 generations of the same family, and one of them more interesting than the next. And so it is a story about women, and it is told by a woman to her granddaughter.
Okay.
So I'm trying to write about women in a woman's voice, and I don't know if I can do it.
Ooh, sounds like you're going to have to do some research. Are you going to Italy?
I've been a couple of times.
Oh, well, okay.
To do research. I mean, a couple of times for research.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you and every American for paying just a little bit of that, because the IRS calls it work. And I
well, good. We hope you come back. Give the shout out to your website, where to get your book, all the good stuff real quick.
Okay. Shout out to all of that. Okay. Oh, goodness. All right. My website is really easy, and I'll give you that when I remember it. It's just samfosterbooks.com. samfosterbooks.com.
All right.
And all you have to do is go there, and you can see critical reviews as well as summaries of everything I ever wrote if you want to read it. samfosterbooks.com.
Love it. I hope you'll come back, and we'll talk to you then.
Thanks for having me, Trina. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.